warm welcome to all our participants. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Payal. She is fellowship in infertility and a member of the International Menopause Society, life member of IMA Menopause Society of is very obvious that this is very close to her heart. She is a member of Managing Committee of PCOS Society of India, co-founder and director on board XP Diagnostic and a consultant at Pranadha Hospital, co-founder of Divine Magic Foundation, a public health and awareness initiative working at grassroots level and digitally through its YouTube channel. So she's really doing, I think, a difference in the life of the women. Speak up role of insulin sensitizers and adjuvants. So I think it is a very, very, topic which is the need of the hour. There are so many insulin sensitizers, available today. And we all know that the pathophysiology, the root cause of PCOS lies, if you see the root, it is the insulin resistance. And this is now PCOS is a lifestyle disorder. Today I think we should call it a lifestyle disorder, just like diabetes and hypertension. That is what I always tell my patients, that it is a lifestyle disorder. If you take care of your health, have good lifestyle, you may, improve. Otherwise, you have to live with it through the different stages of your life. So now here, the role of insulin sensitizers is so very important, when to give, which one to give, how long to give. So there are so many gray areas in this topic. And we are looking forward, Dr. Payal, that you will, in your deliberations, you will help all our viewers to solve these problems. So thank you very much, Dr. Anita, for giving me this opportunity. And welcome to Dr. Payal. Please, we can have your slides.
Dr. Mrinalini ma'am has also joined. Welcome, Dr. Mrinalini. Dr. Mrinalini is... Okay, no problem, ma'am. Madam is the head of the department of Guru Gobind Singh Hospital and Government of NCT of Delhi, and she's our, current president of Delhi Gynae Forum Southwest. Madam has been promoted as advisor currently. She will be, because Dr. Shashi will be taking over as president in the next tenure. So welcome, Dr. Mrinalini. Dr. Mrinalini is also very much involved in maternal health care, especially in our West District. She has been a guide. She is like a mentor to all of us in West District. So welcome, Dr. Mrinalini ma'am also. So can we start the presentation of Dr. Payal?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Jyotsna, for such kind introduction. And I hope by my presentation, I will be able to provide some clarity in the controversial topic. So I welcome everyone, the esteemed panelists, as well as our participants for today's webinar. So my topic of today's discussion is role of insulin in and adjuvants in PCOS. So the contents of my presentation are definition, prevalence, and Indian scenario of PCOS, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, protocols of management, metformin, inositols, MI and DCI, melatonin, and acetylcysteine and vitamin D. So as we all know, PCOS is a heterogeneous endocrine lifestyle disorder leading to several health complications, such as problems with fertility. C stands for cyclical dysregulation or menstrual dysfunction, obesity, hirsutism, acne, and S stands for metabolic syndrome. It is the most common cause of chronic anovulation and anovulatory infertility, and it is associated with metabolic disorder and reproductive function. So PCOS caused by a hyperandrogenism and anovulation without disease of adrenal or pituitary glands. The incidence is 20 to 30% of general population. Triad usually seen is obesity, hirsute, and oligomenorrhea. Menses are heavy and prolonged. Other characteristics are alopecia, increased androgens, increased LH and FSH, and acne. It is a hidden epidemic. So PCOS is changing women's health paradigm. It affects women of younger age and continues till the older age. In the young age, it is associated with menstrual disorders, hirsutism, contraception, sexual health, and infertility. In the older age, pregnancy complications, quality of life, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer risk. So according to WHO, it is the most common hormonal abnormality in women of reproductive age, affecting 5 to 10% of the female population. Prevalence of PCOS in Indian adolescents ranges from 9 to 36%, and early diagnosis is very, very important. In India, insulin resistance is reported in 76.9% of PCOS women. So infertility is always the major concern with PCOS. Although the prevalence of infertility in women with PCOS varies between 70 to 80%, 90% of PCOS women conceive after proper management. So Central Asians and South Asians have severe metabolic phenotype, that is insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, T2DM, acanthosis nigricans, and hypertension. While hyperandrogenic phenotype is common in other parts of the world, including Europeans. Now, insulin resistance, although not included in diagnostic criteria, it is regarded as a major pivotal pathophysiological feature. 40 to 70% of women with PCOS have insulin resistance, defined as reduced glucose response to a given amount of insulin, common in obese as well as non-obese PCOS. Obese PCOS, more insulin resistance is there than compared to non-obese PCOS. Indications that insulin resistance in PCOS independent of obesity. So severe metabolic phenotype due to insulin resistance make Indian women very different from Caucasian PCOS, as they have 2.5 times more insulin release, 47% less SHBG, 2 times higher prevalence of cyst formation, 6 years advanced ovarian aging, 16 times higher risk of JDM, making PCOS management very tricky in Indians. The proposed association of insulin resistance and PCOS, a single factor that causes serine phosphorylation of the insulin receptor and serine phosphorylation of P450, the key regulatory enzyme controlling androgen biosynthesis, would produce both the insulin resistance and the hyperandrogenemia characteristic of PCOS. It is also possible that the insulin resistance and the reproductive abnormalities reflect separate genetic defects, and that the insulin resistance unmasks the syndrome in genetically susceptible women. Recent studies suggest that insulin acting through its own receptor augments steroidogenesis and LH release. Androgens amplify the associated insulin resistance. So what is the pathophysiology? Insulin resistance leads to compensatory hyperinsulinemia, increased androgen production, that is inhibits follicle development and prevents ovulation. It leads to polycystic ovary syndrome, that is development of multiple small follicles that do not ovulate. So to sum up everything about insulin resistance, it is PCOS, it is independent of obesity, increased risk for impaired glucose tolerance and type 2 DM in PCOS women. Obese women with PCOS tend to be more insulin resistant than normal weight counterparts, 30 to 40% prevalence of glucose intolerance, 7 to 10% prevalence of type 2 DM in PCOS women, and insulin resistance worsens over time. So what is insulin resistance associated with? Low-grade chronic systemic inflammation, hypercoagulation, microalbuminuria, hyperinsulinemia, endothelial dysfunction, type 2 diabetes, central obesity, hypertension, atherosclerosis, and dyslipidemia. So insulin resistance leads to 36% increase in hypertension, 37% type 2 diabetes, and decreased HDL and increased triglycerides, according to Cochrane database on metabolic syndrome 1985 to 2007. WHO criteria for metabolic syndrome states that insulin resistance is identified by one of the following: type 2 diabetes, impaired fasting glucose, impaired glucose tolerance, or for those with normal fasting glucose levels, plus any two of the following criteria of antihypertensive medication and or high blood pressure more than 140/90, plasma triglycerides more than 150, HDL cholesterol less than 35 in men and less than 39 in women, BMI of more than 30 and waist ratio more than 0.85 in women, urinary albumin excretion rate more than 20 microgram per minute, or albumin creatinine ratio more than 30. So as we have seen, metabolic implications of PCOS affect multiple systems. Both obese and lean PCOS will have metabolic risk. We must identify at-risk girls right from menarche and try to prevent these metabolic complications by appropriate strategies. As there's no cure, we better prevent this reproductive metabolic disorder for a healthy future generation. More understanding in future may change current strategies. So PCOS needs multidisciplinary attention. So coming to the protocol of management, lifestyle modification is the best and the only available treatment, confirmed treatment for PCOS. Counseling for weight reduction and lifestyle modification, carbohydrate and fat restricted diet, diet restriction and exercise is a sheet anchor of treatment for overweight. Low glycemic index diet up to 85% will improve menstrual cycle regularity and ovulation in about 6 months. Treatment differs from different age groups and situations. What is common in therapeutic treatment is insulin sensitizers and vitamin D. So secondary metabolic impact on PCOS. Women with PCOS may have defect in the secondary messengers contributing to insulin resistance. Deficiency of inositol decreases P13 kinase activity, which leads to increase in the glucose level and insulin resistance. Insulin sensitizers increase the sensitivity of insulin towards the receptor, thereby decreasing hyperinsulinemia. So let's discuss one by one the insulin sensitizers and the adjuvants. What is metformin? Oral anti-diabetic drug. It belongs to biguanide class. Metformin is the only drug available in this class. Activates the enzyme AMP. Primary action is it acts on AMPK, reduces gluconeogenesis and decreases glucose production. Its other actions are it increases glucose uptake, increases insulin sensitivity, increases fatty acid oxidation, and decreases intestinal glucose absorption. The point to remember here is metformin does not cause the release of insulin from the pancreas. So the actions of metformin are, it reduces hepatic glucose production, inhibits intestinal glucose absorption, increases peripheral glucose uptake by the liver, skeletal muscle, and adipose tissue, it stimulates glycolysis in liver, it reduces lipolysis in adipose tissue, and therefore improves insulin sensitivity. So metformin works in subfertility. It has direct and indirect effect. The direct effect of metformin on infertility is ovarian gluconeogenesis, which decreases ovarian androgen production. The indirect effect is it also alters effect of insulin on ovarian androgen production, theca cell growth, and endometrial growth. Therefore, fasting insulin glucose ratios do not predict ovulatory response to metformin. So let's have all the studies put together and see how effective metformin is in PCOS. So evidence summarizes and recommendations from the International Evidence-Based Guidelines for the assessment and management of PCOS, assessment and treatment of infertility. So 71 countries participated in this. There were 37 societies and 15 months, and there are 19 questions which will answer your and provide clarity in use of metformin. So role of metformin induction in infertile patients with PCOS, a guideline. Metformin alone compared with placebo increases the ovulation rate in women with polycystic ovarian syndrome, but should not be used as a first-line therapy for anovulation because oral ovulation induction agents such as clomiphene citrate or letrozole alone are much more effective in increasing ovulation, pregnancy, and live birth rates in women with PCOS. There's fair evidence that metformin alone does not increase rates of miscarriage when stopped at the initiation of pregnancy, and insufficient evidence that metformin in combination with other agents used to induce ovulation increase live birth rates. So does metformin act as first-line ovulation induction therapy, improve clinical pregnancy and live birth rates compared with placebo? There's good evidence that metformin alone versus placebo increases the ovulation rate in women with PCOS. There is insufficient evidence to suggest that metformin alone increases pregnancy rates or live birth rates compared with placebo. So does metformin act as first-line ovulation induction therapy improve clinical pregnancy and live birth rates compared with CC? There is a fair evidence from one large, well-designed RCT that metformin alone is less effective than CC alone for the achievement of ovulation induction, clinical pregnancy, and live birth rate in women with PCOS. If using metformin alone for ovulation induction, then one should inform the woman that there are more effective ovulation induction agents. So as first-line ovulation induction therapy improve clinical pregnancy and live birth rates compared with letrozole alone, there's insufficient evidence to suggest that metformin alone increases pregnancy or live birth rates compared with letrozole alone. However, there's fair evidence based on one well-designed trial in support of letrozole for ovulation induction. Therefore, letrozole is a reasonable first-line agent for ovulation induction in PCOS patients rather than clomiphene citrate. So when used in combination with other agents as first-line therapy for ovulation induction in women with PCOS, does metformin increase pregnancy rate and live birth rates? There's good evidence that metformin in combination with CC improves ovulation and clinical pregnancy rates, but does not improve live birth rates compared with CC alone in women with PCOS. There's fair evidence from one RCT that pre-treatment and with metformin for at least 3 months, followed by the addition of another ovulation-inducing drug, increases live birth rates. So in case of clomiphene citrate resistant PCOS, the incidence is 20%. It is defined as no ovulation or absence of follicular development on TVS with concomitant failure of E2 level to rise after treatment with CC, that is 100 milligram for 5 days in total 3 cycles. It causes hyperandrogenicity, obesity, and severe insulin resistance. Does the combination of metformin and CC or other ovulation induction agents improve ovulation clinical pregnancy rate or live birth rate in the subject of CC-resistant patients with PCOS, CC metformin versus CC alone? So there's fair evidence that clomiphene citrate metformin improves ovulation and pregnancy rate compared with using clomiphene citrate alone in PCOS women. However, more studies are needed to determine whether there may be subgroups of women, example specific BMI, ethnicity, absence of insulin resistance, etc., with PCOS and CC resistance for which clomiphene citrate metformin provides the most benefit over CC alone. So coming to the next question, of other ovulation induction agents improve ovulation, clinical pregnancy rate, or live birth rate in the subset of clomiphene citrate resistant patients with PCOS. The metformin versus laparoscopic ovarian drilling, there's fair evidence that overall pregnancy rates are not different with CC metformin, clomiphene citrate, laparoscopic ovarian drilling, or laparoscopic ovarian drilling alone in women with CC resistant PCOS. There's insufficient evidence regarding pregnancy rate or live birth rate with the use of metformin alone compared with LOD for ovulation induction in CC resistant PCOS patients. So clomiphene citrate metformin versus aromatase inhibitors, what does the study says is there's insufficient evidence to compare metformin plus CC to aromatase inhibitors alone or metformin plus aromatase inhibitors for ovulation induction in CC resistant women. So clomiphene citrate and metformin versus gonadotropins, there's insufficient or conflicting evidence regarding metformin use combined with CC compared with gonadotropins for ovulation induction in women with CC-resistant PCOS. So does pre-pregnancy metformin reduce the risk of miscarriage in non-assisted reproductive technologies? There's fair evidence that metformin used while attempting pregnancy and stopped at the initiation of pregnancy does not affect the rate of miscarriage. There's insufficient evidence to recommend metformin during pregnancy to reduce the chance of miscarriage. Coming to multiple pregnancies, there's good evidence that metformin alone does not increase the rate of multiple pregnancy. While there's no evidence of an effect on multiple pregnancy rates in cycles using combination of clomiphene citrate plus metformin versus clomiphene citrate alone, there remains insufficient data on this method due to lack of adequate power to detect a difference. There's insufficient evidence of a reduced risk of multiple pregnancy with the addition of metformin to FSH compared with FSH alone. So is metformin more effective in lean or obese PCOS patients? There's insufficient good quality evidence to determine if metformin is more effective in non-obese or obese women with PCOS, as both have insulin resistance. So what do the guidelines summarize? Guidelines for the international evidence-based and management of PCOS state that adjunct metformin therapy could be used before and or during FSH ovarian stimulation for IVF ICSI therapy with a gonadotropin agonist protocol to improve the clinical pregnancy rate and reduce the risk of OHS. Adjunct metformin therapy in a gonadotropin antagonist protocol may reduce risk of OHSs. So what is the effect of metformin in PCOS mothers? Metformin to continue if PCOS patient becomes pregnant. So a magic bullet therapy for PCOS would result in weight loss, improve insulin resistance, restore normal ovulatory cycle, increase fertility, decrease hyperandrogenism, decrease the rate of spontaneous abortions, and decrease the risk of GDM if it is to be used in pregnancy. The current front runner for this magic bullet is the biagonite metformin. It appears to do all of the above, but is it safe to continue throughout pregnancy? Now, PCOS taking metformin were more likely to conceive with or without other ovulating induction agents compared with patients who do not take metformin. These results show that continuous metformin therapy throughout pregnancy in women with PCOS can improve pregnancy outcomes by decreasing spontaneous miscarriage rates and preventing GDM with its inherent comorbidity and mortality rate. Whether metformin could reduce the occurrence of GDM in women with PCOS is still controversial, with a recent meta-analysis using fixed models showing that metformin has no significant effect on GDM in women with PCOS. So metformin is usually used in the first 3 months after the woman conceives. So what are the side effects of metformin? 45.8% patients have gastrointestinal problems, complaining of diarrhea, abdominal pain, bloating, heartburn, indigestion, and vomiting. So to summarize everything about metformin, metformin alone compared with placebo may improve ovulation rates, but should not be used as first line since other options like clomiphene and letrozole are more effective. In clomiphene resistance, metformin should be added. Metformin do not increase risk of miscarriages. Metformin could be used as an adjunct before or during stimulation in both agonist and antagonist cycles for IVF treatment to reduce OHSs and improve pregnancy rates. Counsel women that use of metformin in PCOS is off license, and also potential side effects of abdominal discomfort are there. So coming to the Reproductive Sciences 2014, which revealed that altered myoinositol and D-chiroinositol ratio might be one of the etiological factor or the consequence of PCOS. So altered MI-DCI ratio leads to hyperinsulinemia, enhanced epimerization in ovary, decreased MI and increased DCI, MI deficiency in follicular fluid, leads to impaired FSH signaling and poor oocyte quality. So increased DSI and MI ratio leads and overproduction of DCI in ovary. So 6 times more urinary clearance of DCI in obese PCOS women compared to normal women leads to deficiency of DCI in PCOS women. MI-DCI ratio is clearly altered in obese PCOS women. There is altered MI-DCI, poor glucose uptake and utilization, which leads to insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, and hyperandrogenism. So insulin signaling requires activation of inositol phosphoglycans, which are released as secondary messengers in response to receptor binding. So myoinositol, that's predominant form of inositol in ovary, concentration higher in follicular fluid of good quality oocytes. Deficiency of MI in ovary of PCOS women leads to poor oocyte quality. The D-chiroinositol, synthesized by an epimerase enzyme that converts MI to DCI, this deficiency of DCI IPG contributes to insulin resistance. So inositol drug helps to regularize menses. It aids in weight loss along with dietary interventions, ovulation induction as single agent in combination with CC or gonadotropins, ovarian induction in CC resistant women, reduction of miscarriage in PCOS, reduction of risk of pregnancy complications, and reduction of cardiometabolic risk. So inositol is a chemical compound with 6 carbon atoms, a 6-fold alcohol of cyclohexane. It exists in a total of 9 possible stereoisomers, of which the most prominent forms are myoinositol and D-chiroinositol. Myoinositol gets converted into DCI in the ovary through epimerization. So what are the functions of myoinositol? It decreases insulin resistance, it increases insulin sensitivity, it improves glucose utilization. Decreased insulin, all these effects leads to decrease in hirsutism and acne. It restores menstruation, restores ovulation, promotes good quality oocyte, and increases the pregnancy rate of a woman. So in a study where 50 overweight PCOS patients of group A were given myoinositol 2 grams per day, in group B, folic acid and placebo were given. The results showed that plasma LH, PRL, insulin levels, and LH-FSH ratio resulted significantly reduced in menstrual cyclicity, was restored in all aminorheic and oligomenoric subjects. No changes were seen in the patients treated with folic acid. So the important secondary messenger in insulin signal transduction is DCI. A deficiency of the D-chiroinositol phosphoglycan mediator may result in resistance to insulin. D-chiroinositol may increase insulin sensitivity and improve the action of insulin in insulin-resistant subjects. So D-chiroinositol increases glycogen synthesis, which leads to rapidly decreased peripheral hyperinsulinemia. So what is the rationale of using MI and DCI ratio in 40:1? Now, MI and DCI act on 2 different parts in PCOS. The DCI acts on the periphery and MI acts on the ovary. The DCI reduces insulin resistance and MI improves ovulatory function, which leads to improved glucose metabolism, reduced hyperinsulinemia, improved lipid profile, and reduced cardiovascular risk. So to sum up the effects of myoinositol and DCI, myoinositol acts at ovary. MI is FSH second messenger. MI increases FSH signaling and improves oocyte quality and oocyte maturation. Whereas DCI acts at peripheral tissues, it stimulates glycogen synthesis, reduces insulin resistance, and increases insulin sensitivity. So MI is involved in glucose uptake. The DCI second messenger regulates glycogen synthesis, thus modifying insulin resistance. MI and DCI both modulate insulin-dependent testosterone synthesis and thus decrease infertility. So the combined therapy with myoinositol and D-chiroinositol reduce the risk of metabolic disease in PCOS overweight patients compared to myoinositol supplementation alone. So it is always good to use both the drugs. So to sum up everything about inositols, D-chiroinositol is found in high concentration in glycogen storage tissues, liver, muscle, and fat. It acts at peripheral tissues, increases glycogen synthesis, reduces compensatory insulin production and hyperinsulinemia. DCI, by reducing hyperinsulinemia, reduces conversion of MI to DCI at ovary. The myoinositol is found in high concentration in follicular fluid. It acts at ovary and peripheral tissues, increases cellular uptake, glucose uptake, secondary messenger for FSH signaling and reduce FSH requirement. It increases oocyte quality and oocyte maturation. So in the International IVI Congress, myoinositol and D-chiroinositol therapy in physiological plasma ratio 40:1 should be considered as the first-line therapy in PCOS. So the combined myoinositol and D-chiroinositol therapy in physiological plasma ratio 40:1 has been proven to be highly effective in PCOS patients. So MI and DCI therapy in 40:1 ratio should be considered as a first-line therapy in PCOS as it induces spontaneous ovulation, improves oocyte and embryo quality, reduces RFSH requirement, decreases insulin resistance, decreases androgen levels and hirsutism, and there's fair chance of conception. So moving on to oxidative stress in PCOS patients, insulin resistance contributes to oxidative stress and plays an important role in the pathogenesis of PCOS. Oxidative stress leads to decreased insulin sensitivity and increased insulin resistance. Antioxidants help create a balance between beneficial oxidant generation, These frequently act as cell-signaling molecules and damaging oxidative stress. So what are the drugs available that improve? So the first drug I'm going to talk about is melatonin. Melatonin in PCOS, there's more to this hormone than just sleep. So for the management of PCOS, we have healthy lifestyle, medications, and surgical treatment. Healthy lifestyle includes regular exercise, healthy diet, weight control, and to quit smoking. Medications is metformin, oral contraceptives, spironolactone, and surgical treatment is ovarian wedge resection and laparoscopic ovarian drilling. So medicinal treatment, most recognized treatment for PCOS, but they have the prolonged side effects also. Thus, extensive research is carried out to find out alternative medicine for treating PCOS. Melatonin, due to its strong antioxidant property, is in focal attention in the care and cure of PCOS. So melatonin is secreted by pineal gland. Melatonin levels are regulated by photopyroid as its production and secretion are promoted at night in response to darkness. Light suppression suppresses its secretion. Though the pineal gland is the primary source of circulating melatonin, the mammalian ovary as a whole, the granulosa cells, the oocyte, and those making up the cumulus ovorus have been reported to synthesize the melatonin. So melatonin is thought to play a role in PCOS women. It is often PCOS women often report the sleep disturbances, insomnia, poor sleep, and other sleep disorder. This is one of the factors in worsening the symptoms of PCOS. So melatonin helps in reducing that. So melatonin exerts various effects through its two receptors, MT1 and MT2. It has a pronounced effect on female reproductive system, which positively influences the PCOS outcomes up to a larger extent. Melatonin improves the FSH and LH ratio by its effect on HPG axis. It attenuates the insulin resistance, reduces the excess production of insulin from pancreas, improves the SHBG levels. It reduces the excess androgen production in the ovaries. Therefore, melatonin plays a very important role in the improvement of oocyte quality. So to sum up the effect of melatonin on PCOS, by virtue of its potent antioxidant activity and ROS scavenging effect, it reduces ovarian intrafollicular oxidative stress. It improves the oocyte and embryo quality. It improves the fertilization rate, improves the sleep disorders, improves LH-FSH ratio, and thereby androgen production. It also improves the metabolic parameters. Moving on to the next molecule, that is N-acetylcysteine. N-acetylcysteine is an antioxidant that derivative from the amino acid L-cysteine. It can have effects on insulin receptor activity as well as insulin secretion and subsequently increase glucose utility. NAC has anti-apoptotic activity and decreasing the effects on homocysteine levels. NAC is an appropriate choice for induction, evolution, or augmentation in PCOS women and can be used as an adjuvant to clomiphene citrate. So how does N-cysteine affect PCOS patients? It improves insulin receptor activity. It acts as an antioxidant. It has anti-apoptotic activity. It has immunological active, preservation of vascular integrity, and improves insulin secretion in response to glucose. So NAC is a stable derivative of the amino acid cysteine. NAC is an antioxidant as well as an insulin sensitizer. It increases glutathione at cellular level. It acts directly on reactive oxidate radicals. It has an antioxidant effect and exerts protective effects to cell. It inhibits oxidative stress and prevents hyperglycemia, induces insulin resistance. It lowers androgen levels, improves ovulation, pregnancy, and live birth rates. NAC prevents follicular atresia at level of ovary. It regulates menstrual cycle and provides immune support. So in a study where 91 PCOS women were enrolled, 44 belonging to group A and 47 belonging to group B, they were treated with inositol 2 gram plus NAC for 2 times a day. The results showed that it restores ovulation in PCOS patients with oligomenorrhea. Inositol and NAC may have additional non-insulin related mechanisms of action. So to sum up, acetyl-silated derivative of the amino acid L-cysteine used as a mucolytic agent in chronic respiratory illness, effective as an adjuvant to clomiphene citrate for ovulation induction in CC-resistant women with PCOS, The practice points for N-acetylcysteine are: counsel that it is a nutritional supplement. Dose is 600 milligrams 8 hourly. It is safe long-term use, especially in adolescent and in young women. So coming to my favorite molecule, vitamin D in PCOS. Now, vitamin D deficiency contributes to the development of insulin resistance. Vitamin D occurs in two main forms, D2 and D3. Vitamin D2, which is photochemically synthesized in plants, and vitamin D3, which is synthesized in the skin after exposure to sunlight. Now, in the Indian scenario, there is prevalence of more than 90% of Indians having vitamin D deficiency. The picture is similar across the country, both in rural and urban areas. It is common across all age groups, including pregnant and lactating women. So vitamin D has autocrine and paracrine effects, and as well as endocrine effects. It affects bone, skeletal, cardiac musculature, cell proliferation, autoimmunity, immune function, glucose metabolism, vasculature, and blood pressure. So sunlight is a source of vitamin D, but the timing we have to be in sun is between 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. only to make vitamin D. The beneficial effects of vitamin D supplementation on insulin resistance, ovarian follicles maturation, ovulation, and menstrual irregularity were confirmed. It improves ovulation, improves insulin resistance, improves menstruation, and follicular maturation. Multiple studies have illustrated an inverse association between the vitamin D status and hyperandrogenism and insulin resistance. Consequently, intervention with vitamin D at dose as high as 50,000 to 60,000 international units per week have provided improvements in the hyperinsulinemia and androgenic and fertility factors in PCOS women. Overall, high-dose vitamin D supplementation has shown promising results in improving the treatment of the PCOS patients. So it is effective. Vitamin D supplementation improves menstrual frequency and metabolic parameters as stated. In IVF patients, patients achieving CP following IVF exhibited significantly higher FF levels of 25 OHD. So what are the treatment options available for vitamin D deficiency? Option 1 is weekly dose followed by maintenance 60,000 IU of vitamin D3 once a week for 8 weeks, following by maintenance therapy of 60,000 international unit once a month or 1,500 to 2,000 international unit per day. Treatment with higher doses, that is 2 to 3 times higher, is required in obese patients, patients with malabsorption syndrome, and patients on anti-epileptic and anti-tubercular medications. Option 2 is 60,000 to 120,000 international units per month. Option 3 is daily supplementation of 1,000 to 2,000 international units. Option 4 is parenteral mega dose of 3 lakh to 6 lakh IU. It works as depot preparation, measures serum 25 OHD level after 3 to 4 months. If levels are not adequate, then repeat the dose after 6 months. Use it when compliance with oral formulation is a challenge. So 45 to 90% of women are vitamin D deficient, as stated earlier. PCOS and vitamin D deficiency are both associated with insulin resistance, therapeutic adjuvant for the ovulatory dysfunction and metabolic disorders, stabilization of hormones, normalization of the menstrual cycle, and restored ovulation. It improves insulin resistance. It helps to increase longer maintenance of ovarian reserve and decreases androgen levels in women with PCOS. So to conclude about vitamin D, it is 60 to 87% have deficiency. Vitamin D deficiency is common in women with PCOS. 67 to 85% of women. A number of observational studies have demonstrated associations between vitamin D levels and various conditions like preeclampsia, PCOS symptoms, infertility, and menstrual irregularity. Vitamin D is an emerging factor influencing female fertility and IVF outcomes. Nano form of vitamin D is a novel form. Study has shown absorption to be more than 90% and corrected deficiency in 4 weeks and found to be more efficacious when compared to fat-soluble vitamin D3. So now summing up my full elaborate presentation, PCOS is the most common endocrine and metabolic disorder in women of reproductive age. Lifestyle modifications, particularly weight loss, increased exercise in overweight and obese patients is highly recommended. Metformin, myoinositol, D-chiroinositol preferred for women with insulin resistance. Metformin, MI and DCI therapy in 40:1 ratio should be considered as first-line therapy for PCOS. myoinositol and acetylcysteine have emerged as novel pharmacotherapeutics to improve IVF outcomes for the treatment of infertility. N-acetylcysteine is a powerful antioxidant, inhibits oxidative stress and prevents hyperglycemia, prevents follicular atresia at level of ovary, supplement vitamin D deficient patients, laparoscopic ovarian drilling if medical treatment fails. So thank you for listening and watching my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.
Me here. PCOS is the commonest endocrine metabolic disorder, as you all know, and we need to discuss it again and again. Today, Dr. Sandhya Saran will speak on PCOS and obesity. He is a consultant obstetrician and gynecologist working at Jupiter Hospital, Kaushalya Medical Foundation, and Kurare Hospital, LH Hiranandani Hospital, Thane. And she has a special interest in endoscopy, infertility management, and yoga. She was the recipient of Young Scientist Award in 1994, recipient of Desa Silver Jubilee Award in 2001, best paper in International Congress on Infertility in 2003, Bharat Jyoti and Best Citizen Award 2007. This Bharat Jyoti Award is very famous award. Many eminent and elite persons have received this award all over India in different fields of literature, politics, and all those. And I must congratulate you, Dr. Sandhya Saran, for this Bharat Jyoti Award. Devised normograms for labor monitoring, and she is an actor, singer, tracker, and environmentalist. And she is the president of Thane Obstetrics and Gynecological Society for the year 2021-22. And she will speak on pregnancy, PCOS with obesity. Obesity is a very important component of PCOS and needs to be addressed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shashilata, for that wonderful, absolutely, it was very delightful introduction. And I must thank the organizers for inviting me, Dr. Anita, Dr. Payal, and also the co-chairperson, Dr. Richa Sharma. I think we share the passion for environment. She's got the first prize at the environmental contest in Foxy, individual prize, whereas my society's got the first prize, Prathane Society, for planting the maximum number of trees. So I'm really happy to be here with such a lovely audience. And I just finished an emergency, so I'm a little late and I'm sorry for that. And I have requested Dr. Payal to please sort of share the screen because I'm sharing it from an iPad right now. I'm outside. So my presentation is something which is very simple, and I believe she's given a very comprehensive view of most of the things. So I will just try and make it very basic, and I hope it's going to be interesting. Now we all know an apple a day keeps a doctor away. But if you start looking like an apple, then you should beat the doctor right away. So this is what we see when we have an apple versus a pear. So if you are having central obesity, then it is something that is a cause of concern. And it is always better not to have either ways, but then a pear is always a little better than an apple. Next slide, please. Now the ESHRE recommendations on PCOS, as we have all been conversant with the fact that it is a major public health issue with reproductive, metabolic, and psychological features. Now this affects almost 8 to 13% of the women who are in the reproductive age group. Many of them, which is a very sad truth, go undiagnosed because nowadays, because of the adolescent obesity on the rise and also increased incidence of all metabolic disorders, it is brushed under the carpet saying that she's just studying a bit too much or she's just working from home, so she's put on weight. That is what many of the parents think when they see their children putting on weight, sitting in front of the TV or working on the laptop, which is also the same for older people. Even we have been affected by the pandemic. Many doctors are working only online consulting. So this has taken a toll on everybody, but India is becoming the obesity and the diabetic capital of the world. So we really need to take cognizance of this fact that it is affecting our children as well as the women who are in the reproductive age group, causing more and more anxiety, depression, low body esteem, and later on they are at a risk of metabolic syndrome, which can be a pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular risk factors. Next slide. So these are the characteristics. As we all know, I love this slide because it's got the Bahubali, all three-pronged approach. I think it is multi-pronged approach. As we all know, the features of insulin resistance, hyperandrogenism, hormonal imbalance, metabolic disorders, and psychological. So I will more or less be stressing on the obesity aspect of this disease, as many of the things on therapy have already spoken about. Next slide. Now we all know the pathophysiology. The underlying cause is insulin resistance. It is 20 to 50% of the patients who have this, and compensatory hyperinsulinemia is affecting almost 70% of the women with PCOS. Not necessarily that all of them are obese. It is only 70 to 80% who are obese, but we see a lot of lean PCOS also, but the underlying pathophysiology of hyperinsulinemia remains the same. Now, this results in increased ovarian androgen production and decreased production of SHBG by the liver. So there is a preponderance of free androgens, which cause the androgen excess and hyperandrogenism. Now, obesity, as we all know, the prevalence is increasing and it varies from 30 to 75%. And many of them may not have the centripetal or centrifugal obesity, and they can be pursued, or they may just have menstrual irregularities without the other features of PCOS. Next slide. Now, as we all know, the diagnostic criteria, they have been undergoing changes, the NIH, then the Rotterdam, then the Androgen Excess Society. So more or less, we stress on hyperandrogenism. The PCOM, that is the polycystic ovarian morphology, it is not a mandatory criteria, especially in adolescents. We do not advocate sonography till they achieve 8 years post-menarche. And many of the features on sonography are similar in physiological adolescent age group. So we do not have a lot of stress on this. But yes, in order to segregate the patients into the proper phenotype, it is important to do a sonography so that we know what kind of a PCOS phenotype she fits into. Next slide. Now, obesity. As I have already mentioned, the increased insulin, it acts on the liver, decreases the SHBG. At the same time, it also decreases the insulin-like growth factor binding protein. Now, why this is important? Because it causes an increase in the insulin-like growth factor 1. All of these act on the ovary. There is theca cell hyperplasia. There is more of androgen secretion, and this causes follicular atresia, atretic follicles, and this predisposes to also decrease in aromatase activity. So there is less conversion to estrone, and a preponderance of the androgenic activity then causes all the features of PCOS. Next slide. So we all know that almost 80% are hyperinsulinemic, and they may be obese or they may not, but we definitely see a lot of obesity, and the milieu is mainly androgenic, and there is a decrease in SHBG. Next slide. I was just speaking at another conference where we were stressing the importance of SHBG. We have seen that many of the endocrinologists nowadays, we do not do the regular armamentarium of FSH, LH levels. We do not even measure the insulin levels or the testosterone levels when there is overt acanthosis seen. In these patients, the response to therapy is often done by SHBG levels. So it is very important to keep that in mind. And nowadays we have included that in our gamut of tests. Now, why should we take this so seriously? Because the associated medical conditions. Now there is so much of diabetes happening. We have seen type 2 diabetes mainly, and also a lot of GDM. Many of our pregnant patients are coming with GDM nowadays, and they say that the oral glucose tolerance should be done for all women who are pregnant. at the first visit itself. These are the guidelines by the Indian Diabetic Society, and we also follow them in most of the hospitals here. Now, low HDL, as we all know, the HDL is cardioprotective. So if there is a low LDL and high triglycerides, then there is a propensity towards cardiovascular disease. Non-alcoholic steatohepatitis is also on the rise. Metabolic syndrome, that is hypertension, diabetes mellitus, dyslipidemias are also on the rise. All these show elevated CRP levels and increased propensity to heart disease and advanced atherosclerosis. Very important, which I want to mention here, is sleep apnea. We may not realize it, but many people nowadays suffer from sleep apnea and they wake up very tired, or they may not have the requisite oxygenation in the body, and they also suffer from nightmares and dreams and other metabolic features. So this is something which we need to take in very seriously, especially in obese patients where there can be a tongue fall and increase in sleep apnea patterns. Next slide. So metabolic syndrome, what is this exactly? Now it is a cluster of cardiovascular risk factors. There can be obesity, hyperinsulinemia, hypertension, atherogenic dyslipidemia, as I mentioned, atherosclerosis, hyperglycemia. Now, what is contributory to all this? We all know physical inactivity, especially in this time of pandemic when there is a lot of restriction and people are not allowed to go out. There was a time when even taking a walk outside was not allowed, at least in Maharashtra, and the increased amount of takeaway. Now, this is something which everybody is facing. People do not really want to cook at home. There is either an excuse of no time or too much of boredom, and in some cases, a very, very disposable income. So they would like to just order, and most of the food which is ordered from outside has a very high amount of both salt as well as fat. So this is something which is, we need to be very vigilant about this. So atherogenic diets, and which leads to all these abdominal obesity and adiposity. Trans fat is one thing which I always tell, parabens and trans fat. I was giving a talk on chemicals in our food. So I was just stressing on that whenever we buy something, what is very important is to see the label. The amount of carbohydrate, fat, and other content that is there in that packaged food is something which we need to take into account. So if you are going to eat 2000 calories in one meal, then there is definitely no way that you're going to remain healthy, and it will go on from an apple to it will become fatter and fatter like a watermelon maybe. So we have to be very careful about all these things. Now, waist circumference. We have a PCO clinic in our hospital where we measure the BMI, the waist-hip ratio in all the patients, and also the baseline investigations. If they are very obese, then we do the triglycerides, the cholesterol, the lipid levels, and we measure all these things. The blood pressure, of course, is taken into account. Nowadays, the stress is on 110/70 being the optimal blood pressure. Initially, we were saying it is 120/80, but slowly over a period of time, the guidelines stress that it can be even lower. 110/70 is absolutely optimal. But we see blood pressures of 130/90 very commonly, and the metabolic syndrome is if it is more than 130/85 millimeters of mercury. Fasting glucose 110 milligrams per DL. Now the latest guidelines say up to 100 is permissible, but we generally see a lot of girls between 100 and 110. So this is very important. If the waist is more than 35 inches or more than 88 centimeters, then it is the time that you put on the running shoes and start your exercise. Now, signs and symptoms, the obesity, acanthosis, if it is present, the velvety skin that is on the back of the neck or in the underarms in the axillary area, then we really do not need to do insulin levels, because this is absolutely a sign of hyperinsulinemia. Acne. Now, acne and hirsutism is a sign of increased androgenism. Hyperandrogenism can be biochemical or clinical, and these two are the clinical signs. Obesity, as we have already mentioned, if the BMI is more than 25, then that is, it is measured in kilograms by meter square, the height in meters square. So if it is more than 25, then it is considered overweight. More than 30 is considered obese, and more than 35 is morbidly obese. Irregular menstrual periods. Now, this is something which is very common. I have seen many girls coming in by the age of 16 or 18, hardly having periods in, say, 3 or 4 months. So at least 4 menstrual cycles in a year is what is recommended. So if there is an interval of more than 90 days, then definitely it needs to be corrected. A small irregularity, especially in adolescent age group, need not be stringently corrected, but a gap of more than 90 days needs to be addressed. And hirsutism, of course. Hirsutism is one feature which distresses everybody. The moment they see a few hair on the chin or on the face, on upper body or on the abdomen, they immediately come to you, and this is what they want removed. Girls as young as 16 or 18 are opting for laser reduction nowadays. This is something I would like to say. Laser reduction ideally should not be done before 2021. That is what the dermatologists also recommend. And as gynecologists, I would say, if the patient is come with hirsutism, it is always better to take an endocrine as well as a dermatophilia. Because many a times we miss other causes of hyperandrogenism. Important is to rule out the other positive factors and then move on to treatment. Next slide, please. So what are the differential diagnoses? We have to rule out thyroid disease, hyperprolactinemia, because they are many a times associated with PCOS. Of course, premature ovarian failure is something, again, which needs to be addressed, especially in those who are keen to conceive. And we are seeing girls getting married after 30, 35 also nowadays. And most of them, they come and they have irregular cycles, and then slowly, some of them start getting amenorrhea for more than 3 or 4 months. And we notice that they're going into POF. So this is something which we need to keep into account. The biological clock is ticking. There is an early age group of menopause seen nowadays. It could be the stress or it could be any other factor. We have to rule out concomitant problems like congenital adrenal hyperplasias, for which the 21 OH deficient non-classic CAH, we have to do the 17 OHP levels. Cushing's syndrome is something, again, associated with hypertension, obesity, amenorrhea, and hirsutism and acne. So this is something which needs to be ruled out. Androgen secreting tumors, though they are very rare, but still we should see to it that we do not miss it. And severe insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, only then we do the fasting insulin and the glucose tests. And idiopathic hirsutism. So it's a disease of exclusion. Once we fulfill the Rotterdam criteria, then we label the patient as a PCOS patient. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the lab tests, we do not generally do FSH, LH levels for all, but yes, those who are looking for infertility treatment, then we would definitely not only do the FSH, LH, but also the AMH levels. That is very important. And the prolactin, thyroid, TSH, and pre-T3, T4 in that age group. Testosterone is something which is a bone of contention, because most of the labs do not have the standardized assays to do testosterone levels. So we stress on free testosterone levels, or the total calculated testosterone is what is recommended. And we do not do the free androgen index, which was done earlier. Androstenedione levels, DHEAS levels, these are done only in overt hirsutism when we see that, we have to rule out any other adrenal causes. Yes, OGT is something we like to do in many of our patients. The 75-gram OGT is very important, and we do measure the sugars at the fasting as well as 1 hour after the test. And total triglycerides. The triglycerides, if they are less than 150, it is fine. But if it is more than 150, if it is between 150 and 200, then we have seen a lot of response to just lifestyle modification. And HDL, if it is more than 50 milligrams per DL, then that is considered normal. So these are the basic lab tests which may be done in these patients, but we have to see, individualize the case, and then decide which test works the best. Now, adolescent PCOS, what is the main worry in this age group who come to us? They are mainly concerned about their irregular cycles or their the features of hyperandrogenism. So these are the two things which need to be corrected in this age group. Now, as I said, if the cycles are of more than 90-day duration, then definitely you have to give them minimum 4 bleeds per year. So progesterone can be added, it can be given cyclical, and it's also recommended that if you are giving COCs for these patients, then after 16 years, long-term therapy is acceptable, but between 12 to 16, then you should give only low-dose COCs, and also for very short periods. Now, preferably use the ones which have very low androgenic properties. Now, these are prospirinone is the newer, and the desogestrel, these are the newer ones. So they have also mild mineralocorticoid effects. So these can be given, but we have to be very careful. In very young age group, I am very wary of prescribing COCs because I take the family history into account, especially if there's hypertension, obesity in the family, then I would be very wary in giving them COCs. In fact, I would prefer just giving plain progesterone withdrawal in these patients. And also a break of every 3 months, every year, to prevent thromboembolic events. Because these people are so sedentary, they do not exercise, and we never know when we land up with a thromboembolic feature in any of these patients. Now, if there is oligo or amenorrhea, then only after 2 or 3 years of menarche, we look into treatment. Otherwise, we always wait for the HPA axis to regulate. And all the 3 criteria, that is hyperandrogenism, PCOM, and there should be ovulatory dysfunction or menstrual irregularities in an older age group. In a young age group, below 8 years of menarche, we do not really emphasize on sonography. And what is very important on the other hand is lifestyle modification. Now, nothing works as good as a lifestyle modification. That should be the mainstay of our treatment. Every patient should be given a diet chart and some customized form of exercise. So a hypocaloric diet for 6 months is what is recommended, and also physical activity, at least 30 minutes per day or 150 minutes a week are recommended. This is grade A EL4. Only when nothing is working, then definitely we should add metformin as a second line therapy, because as Dr. Payal has already elaborated in great detail, it helps in weight loss, it helps in regularization of the menstruation, and it prevents all these sequelae of diabetes because these are insulin sensitizers and they improve the insulin levels and also the other hormonal parameters. So these, along with myoinositols, they should be given in these patients, but you have to select which patient requires what. So you can give her a combination of diet, exercise, modification, as well as metformin and myoinositols, and also give her withdrawal with progestins time and again, so that everything is taken care of gradually. Next slide, please. Now, similarly, in adult PCOS, we also see that those who are not seeking infertility, not seeking fertility. Now, fertility is something which needs to be treated completely different. For that, you need a lot of preconceptional counseling. You need to do a lot of other investigations, which may not be the same for this age group. But we need to remember 3 or 4 things in this age group. That is, first of all, you have to take a detailed history regarding their diet, lifestyle, whether they smoke, whether they drink, or they have any other substance abuse in their family. Because many a times we forget to take this history, and the patient may not be responding to treatment, and you may notice that she is smoking and she is having a lot of alcohol every day, because nowadays it has become like a fashion. Almost every young, dynamic woman who is basically mostly in the IT sector and even in the corporate sector, we see that it has become a norm. So it is no longer an isolated case, but at least in metros, we are seeing a lot of this kind of high risk behavior, whereas the health is concerned. And they do not take requisite vitamins and the diet which is required to maintain a healthy lifestyle. So this is something we need to counsel them before we start on therapy. So this, again, like I said, again, lifestyle modification, diet, exercise is something which we need to tell them. Then identification of metabolic syndrome markers and treat them properly. That is very important. If you are seeing something of an altered lipid profile, then please see that she is treated on those basis. Also, it is always better to take a cardiology opinion if the triglycerides are very abnormal. If there is a lot of change in thyroid and sugar levels and insulin levels, always take a help of an endocrinologist. As gynecologists, we definitely treat all of them, but when you specifically see a particular complaint, then it is very important to see to it that you keep another expert in the loop, because many times these patients may not respond and they may not be compliant, and that is something which can put us into trouble. Now, like I said, a caloric restricting diet. Now, what is that? Even a 500 calorie restriction in the normal everyday caloric count can help in reducing almost 0.5 kgs per week. And physical activity, there is nothing like a cheat day. There is nothing like you exercise one day and the other 2 days you relax. So it should be a sustained physical activity. If not 60 minutes, then at least a burst of 20 minutes, so that you try and reach 150 minutes per week. And like I said, control of other factors, very important. Alcohol, caffeine intake, cessation of smoking. These are very important factors. If there is fertility issues, then of course the management differs. In morbidly obese women, more than 35 BMI, then we see to it that the BMI should come down to 30. Now this is very important. Metformin works very well if the BMI is around 30. If it is very high, then metformin also does not work very well. So you have to motivate this patient that she has to come down to 30, and then we see an improvement with all kinds of therapy. Orlistat can be given up to 3 months. I am not a strong proponent of any of these pharmacological therapy for weight loss, because there is a lot of controversy as to the rebound gain in weight and the other side effects. But amongst all of them, Orlistat has been shown to be safe. In obese women, of course, we give metformin, myoinositols, and there is a myoinositol D-chiro-inositol 40:1 ratio. The rationale behind giving 40:1 has been explained for 6 months. Now, bariatric surgery should always be the second line, which I'll explain again, but only if it is more than 50, then bariatric surgery is the first line of treatment. And like in my CV, you've already heard that I am a strong yoga proponent. I definitely believe in a positive role of yoga. It is a lifestyle modification and works wonders at all levels. Next slide, please. So obesity and PCOS, as we have all seen the pharmacodynamics. Now what happens is, now ghrelin is the hormone which causes an increased appetite. So there is more of ghrelin and there is decrease in leptin. So what will happen is the patient keeps eating more, the satiety center is never satisfied, and so they keep getting more and more obese. So this is what happens. Obesity, then there is definitely more preponderance of androgen, and the whole vicious cycle continues. Next slide. Now, metformin has been dealt with great detail, but I just wanted to add one thing, that it should be given for at least 6 months for the results to show, and giving a low dose does not really make any difference. So the dose should be proper. It should be at least 500 milligrams BD. It can be given a maximum up to 2,500 milligrams per day. Now, at a very high BMI, it shows a poor response. 4 weeks pre-treatment, suboptimal, and insulin resistance PCOS with low BMI shows a good response. Higher insulin, low androstenedione, less severe menstrual irregularities show a good response. So definitely it is a very good drug and it should be given for obese PCOS and those with menstrual irregularities. We see remarkable changes within 3 months in terms of regulation of cycles and a radical improvement in other parameters in 6 months of time. So at least 6 to 9 months is what we recommend. Those who get pregnant, we do not stop metformin like we used to before. Many people even continue up till 9 months, though personally I feel 3 months later we can take a call whether we need to stop it. Next slide, please. So this metformin and inositol, MI and DCI, Dr. Payal has just spoken so elaborately, so beautifully. Significant weight reduction, decrease in hyperinsulinemia, reduction in androgen levels, restoration of ovulation, increased SHBG, higher pregnancy and live birth rate, and the first line medication for metabolic manifestations such as hyperglycemia. So this is the first line therapy in PCOS in these patients who fit into this bracket. Next slide. Now again, vitamin D she has stressed on, so I will not like to elaborate on this. It is supposed to be a wonder vitamin. It helps in all aspects in many of the endocrine problems. They say it is a new endocrine organ. So vitamin D, the skin is considered a new endocrine organ, and like she already gave the therapy, 8 weeks of loading and then maintenance therapy. Now maintenance is very important, up to 2000 IU per day is what is recommended for maintenance, and this is something which you can even tell your patient to sit in the sunlight. Of course, in the rains it is not possible, but optimal time is between 10 AM and 2 PM. So even a 20-minute exposure to sunlight gives a very good vitamin D level. So this is something which we should tell all our patients because they are always indoors. They are sitting in the AC, they do not exercise, they do not go out at that particular time. So they have very low vitamin D levels. It is a very sad thing. We are a tropical country, and in spite of that, we are facing massive vitamin D deficiencies in our population. Next slide. Now, this is again one slide which I want you to see carefully. Now, what we say in PCOS, some time back, there was a plate which was given. It was a 6-inch plate. So this is what we say, that you should use a small plate. So ideally, they say eat what can come within your palm. Now that is very difficult. Nobody can eat so less. But you can definitely have a smaller plate than normal. And what you need to do is avoid processed and fried foods. and simple carbohydrates like rice, potatoes, white sugar, pasta. Now, many people say, I don't have sugar, I have jaggery. But we have to remember that ultimately they are all the same. So it doesn't matter what form of sugar you are taking, but you should avoid it. Take more complex carbs like oatmeal and more of fresh fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and lean proteins. This go a long way in helping you reduce weight. It is never in isolation. Every day I read articles in the paper. One says diet is the main thing. One says no, exercise is the main thing. People keep fighting, but you know what? It all goes hand in hand. You have to do them both together. And the third is medication. So I always say diet, exercise, medication. Everything goes hand in hand. So women with WHO group 2 and ovulatory infertility with PCOS who have a BMI of 30 or over must lose weight. This alone may restore ovulation, improve the response to ovulation induction agents, and have a positive impact on pregnancy outcomes. Now we see the PCOS and obesity. If acanthosis is present, it is because of elevated insulin levels. So whenever you start with weight loss and then with medication. So it will definitely help. Next slide, please. So like I said, the diet and exercise, a daily caloric deficiency. The Androgen Excess and Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome Society recommends lifestyle management as the primary therapy in overweight and obese women with PCOS for the treatment of metabolic complications. Next slide. Weight loss, as I have already recommended, even the fasting insulin, androstenedione, DIH levels, and all these things, they all improve, and the triglycerides come down, and there is improvement in dyslipidemias. Next slide. Now, obesity, like we said, the higher BMI related to greater prevalence of menstrual irregularities, hyperandrogenemia, and hirsutism. Now, bariatric surgery should be considered the second line in adult women with PCOS who are anovulatory, have a BMI of more than 35 kg per meter square, and who remain infertile despite taking intensive multidisciplinary therapy, targeted lifestyle management, reduction of caloric intake, exercise, behavioral therapy, and drug interventions for a minimum of 6 months. Only after 6 months of doing all this, if there is no response, only then and then should they be enrolled for bariatric surgery, not before. Nowadays, we see a lot of people going in for surgery as a first line, which should not be endorsed. So this is very important that first they should try for 6 months, only then they should go for bariatric surgery. Next slide. Now, management of long-term sequelae is very important. Cardiovascular disease, hypertension, dyslipidemias, predisposition to macrovascular disease and thrombosis, obstructive sleep apnea is something which I have stressed upon. Consider polysomnography at risk. Threefold increase in malignancy, endometrial cancers. So we have to see to it that unopposed estrogen is something which we should take care of, and we should do screening in these patients who are at the risk of endometrial CAs. Even breast cancer and ovarian cancers should be something which we should look out in these patients with estrogen preponderance. Next slide. So type 2 diabetes and PCOS, as we have already mentioned, doing insulin levels is meaningless. Metformin can be used for IGT and to prevent dyslipidemias. Endometrial cancer, there is a 2 to 6-fold risk. So a pragmatic approach can include COCPs or progestin therapy in those whose cycles are longer than 90 days. Next slide, please. So diet and weight loss, like I said, these minions, they say it all. I think you're suffering from lack of vitamin E. What's your favorite exercise? Chewing. We must get the word out, how to weigh yourself and get the most accurate result. I can't believe I've been doing it wrong all these years. Did you know diet stands for did I eat that? And I have been on a diet for 2 weeks. All I have lost is 14 days. So I just love these minions and they say it all. So with this positive note, we should all start doing a diet and weight loss program. Next slide, please. So this is basically the PCOS Endocrine Society guidelines. This is just a repetition of what I have said. The exact diagnosis, dividing into appropriate groups, targeting the hyperandrogenism, evaluating them, looking out for other metabolic problems, treating sleep apneas, diabetes, endometrial cancer propensity, cardiovascular disease, risk has to be explained, hormonal contraception for menstrual abnormalities, hirsutism, PCOS, acne, all these things should be treated along with the dermatologist. Infertility treatment is a different ballgame. Metformin, myoinositols, definitely important for glycemic abnormalities. And the role of weight loss is very, very important and cannot be stressed more. So my last slide, next one, is something which I would like to tell everyone. During early school age, at the time of health education, girls should be advised to adopt a healthy lifestyle in the form of balanced diet, having locally available food articles like all cereals and pulses, beans, green leafy vegetables, seasonal fruits, and dairy products, whatever is there in a very appropriate amount, not more, not less. Monotonous diet should be avoided as it will cause nutritional deficiencies. And please do not have cold drinks and see the TV and keep popping in chips and chocolates all the time. Junk food should be avoided. They should be motivated to play outdoors. And even if there is a lockdown, you can climb the steps, you can do Zumba at home, you can do dancing, you can do so many other things. And keep an active lifestyle. It helps you remain positive and it helps you develop into a good human being. So this is what I stressed from the beginning. And thank you all for such a wonderful invitation and a patient hearing.